If everyone's comfortable, settled in. So this is how we're going to work, and this is how it's advertised. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ideas and questions of research leadership from the point of view primarily of the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So really from the point of view of arts and languages research. And then Laurence and Leia are going to talk to us a little bit about the SRC. So you might argue that the SRC and the disciplines within the SRC's kind of umbrella are slightly further ahead in kind of defining what research leadership might be in formal terms, and they're going to tell us exactly what that means. Say yes, Jerome. And then we'll have a break, and that's when you can carry on doing the more interesting part of the day, which is to talk to one another about fun research that you're doing. And then Kevin and Tarani have kindly come to talk about the two initiatives that they run within the university as a sort of there's a couple of case studies in the diversity of research leadership that you kind of take within institutions, and also the kind of potential and the good things I'm hoping they're going to say about it. How you can then affect wider conversations within a discipline, within a sub-discipline, within all manner of kind of conversation. Okay, why do we care about this? Well, can I just ask a question here? Are there people here who are either PhD students present, postdoctoral? Are you here because you kind of want to know about funding, or because you want to know about jobs? Who's here because they want to know about funding? Okay, what about jobs? Well, because it's interesting because from my point, so I sit on this AHRC advisory group about skills and careers for early career researchers and PhD students, PGRs. And it's clear that there's kind of one of the agendas for that group is to think about the funding and how we might want to kind of sort of think about funding issues. But also the AHRC has a kind of, and the ESRC I guess, clearly has a kind of sense in which they are trying to encourage good models of good practice. And so the research leadership issue, I think, for the AHRC is a way of trying to inculcate certain ways of thinking within the discipline, within the sector. So it's kind of not quite a sort of cut and dried as just being about money. This is why I'm interested in talking to you about research leadership. Hopefully you are as well. So increasingly it's a model that's going to become key when you're going to be making applications. Those applications from being part of an application as a PhD student or as just a postdoctoral student, all the way up until running massive projects of your own when you become professorial and world leaders and dominators of your field. One of the reasons the AHRC is interested in this in relationship to kind of early career researchers is the sense in which you need to be able to think about these questions from a very, very early point in your career, even actually at PhD level. Start thinking about these kinds of ideas that we're going to talk about today. Does that seem reasonable? Because this is a way of thinking about the academic, or trying to rethink how academia works, how the career of an academic works. Also interested in, I mean, this is just basically because there are also schemes that the AHRC and the SRC are running, which people can then be part of, which have these kind of leadership aspects of. I've just applied for one, these guys have them. You have them, right? You're on the fellowships? Yeah. So this again is a part of the sort of AHRC's and the SRC's kind of hump priming, attempting at sort of leading what's going on. I'm going to talk quite a lot about collaboration and interdisciplinary stuff, and this is kind of increasingly important. This is what I'm interested in, the idea of we might be able to articulate what research leadership is. And I think the earlier that you can start doing that in your careers, that's the better in some ways, whether you're doing it or not, that's not the matter. But being able to sort of recognise what this might be and think about it, and think about kind of attending to it as an issue, I think is kind of key. Just because it's good for your kind of definition as an academic and as a researcher. I'm now being slightly nervous that I'm talking out of turn. Am I right? Broadly right? And also this idea, as I've said already, about this idea that the HRC is keen to develop sustainable researchers, which is a brilliantly civil service way of talking about. If you go to the HRC and they tell you these things, you think, what does that actually mean? But the point is, I think about kind of inculcating senses of professionalism, ways in which we might think about being better at what we do. Right, so what is it? Anyone got a working definition of what research leadership is? No? I don't really. it's clear to me that it's quite broad, and it's clear to me that actually you can kind of make it what you wish, depending on your uniqueness as a researcher. So we go back to the sustainable researchers. I think that it's clear that the idea is that it's my email, sorry. That your own sort of path as a researcher can allow you to do unique research leadership. There's not a sort of template or a one-size-fits-all, I don't think, from the point of view of the funding bodies anyway. But this is what the AHRC says when they talk about research leadership in the context of funding. And they talk about ability to have a transformative impact. All right, now impact is a dirty word, obviously, but what they're talking about is being able to demonstrate the potential for this, or the fact that you've already done it, hitherto, right? And we might want to think a little bit about what this word transformative means. My sense is that when particularly the AHRC framed its definitions for the fellowship scheme, which is where this comes from, they were thinking quite broadly, but they've been quite concerned that quite a lot of people have taken this very, very seriously. You basically have to completely change the world. If you haven't found a cure for cancer, then basically you're not going to get any money. But I think the idea of transformation is about being able to reflect on the effect of your research and to think about how your research might affect change in your field and in your discipline. Now, obviously, this is something we should be pretty good at anyways. If you're writing an article, this is what you should be arguing for your article or your argument or your data set or whatever. Well, I think it's the ability to be able to reflect upon your own kind of research practice as having a kind of contribution to make and transforming, as I've said, your discipline. So not just the ideas and the research, although that's key, but also the ability to disseminate that work, the ability to influence people, the ability to make connections and network and work with people in order to have this transformative effect. Right? So, whilst at the heart of everything is research excellence, part of what research leadership is, I think, is about communicating that, it's about networking, it's about making kind of connections with other people, and therefore having this kind of transformative effect. Does this seem sensible or scary? Both. Yeah. But what do you think? Part of me feels that this is what we should be always doing. I mean, isn't this what scholarship kind of is, right? So this kind of grey area of leadership seems to me worrying in some way. And when you write articles, when you write books, when you write pieces of research or give papers, you're always kind of contributing to a new way of thinking, surely, unless it's just, I don't know what else it would be. So this kind of notion of transformation is the kind of key one. I think we need to sort of, really try and focus on what we might think that this might mean. Key to the AHRC's sense of research leadership is about collaboration as well. This is something that happens when you work with other people. It's all right, there's coffee. So collaboration of any kind, and within the arts this is quite difficult. And I think one of the things that we need to start thinking about quite carefully within arts and languages research is how we collaborate with people, and how we demonstrate that our collaboration with people is leadership and is research of some kind. Hands up here, for instance, anyone who's written a collaborative paper. Very many. Hands up here who see themselves as part of a team in research. Quite good. And I think that these kinds of questions of how we collaborate and how we work with one another and how you lead collaboration particularly are kind of central to ideas of leadership. It's about excellence in research as well. It's about the kind of feedback loop, that you are very good at leadership and at articulating leadership, but you also, that is part of your excellent research, and that it all goes round and round. By being a great leader, by being someone who can put connections together and make all kinds of kind of interesting things happen, your research is better, but also your leadership is better. Yeah, it goes round and round and round. This is brilliant. Again, I said about civil service. Civil service ease. The self-empowerment of the researcher by the institution. That is a phrase that I heard in a meeting. No, face it, this is not such an awful thing. This is a great thing. What this is saying is that basically the institution should be supporting. Now, the institution can be the funding body or the institution that you work for. And the institution should be allowing you to go forth and be brilliant and demonstrate leadership, as Tarani and Kevin are going to show us later on. So there's clearly a kind of sense here that you have to demonstrate a relationship with your institution, whether that institution be the AHRC, whether the institution be a funding body, other kind of funding body, or a non-HEI, but having a kind of sense in which you're being supported and developed. Particularly, this is to do with your university and the university that you work at, and the sense in which a university is supporting your work and supporting your development, right? So it is, as I've said, about the kind of quite idealistic sense. That's not fair.
I'm still a bit fuzzy on the distinction between excellence and leadership in terms of clustering to in. Presumably, excellence means that your research has clustering to in.
I presume so, yeah.
What distinguishes the two is that leadership involves the kind of more the PR side of things.
Well, maybe. I mean, that would be a kind of cynical way of thinking about it in some ways. I think it's grey, and this is why I'm quite tentative about saying this is what it is and this is what it isn't. Anything that, from the point of view of the AHRC, as far as I understand it, anything that they fund is about the excellence of the research, and everything around it, whether it's knowledge transfer, whether it's fellowship, CDA, whatever, is about that primarily, and then your impact statement, your academic beneficiaries, those are kind of subsidiary. But I think what this is trying to do is combine the two, is to say that to be an excellent researcher, you have to be an excellent leader of research. I kind of think it's so. I mean, does that seem fair, or am I being a bit fascist in this argument?
Sort of, except that leaders have followers, so
yeah, I guess so.
Well, no, it has to be some. No, I don't mean followers as in less important necessarily, but you have to be showing the way, as Jeff says, and you have to have somebody who's interested in that direction. So it has to surely be to some extent collaborative, or more formally collaborative than just writing an article that other people are interested in reading.
Yeah. Although, yes, I think you have to be able to demonstrate, that there is some kind of relationship with something outside of just your work. But yeah, I mean, the question is about whether it's just PR. I don't think it is just PR. I think it's about being able to. Well, there's an aspect. No, not even that. I think it's about being able to articulate the relationships that you build up and the ways in which you ways in which those feed back into your research. If that makes sense.
Sorry, I don't know what I was supposed to say. And one of the things that strikes me is that all of our academic careers are largely about the bits of the story about RCB, the narrative there. And quite early on, you realise that for the CEDs, you don't know them already, you have to find ways to get to know them. So I think there is a PR, but that's generally the way it works, unfortunately.
Certainly, I mean, I think there is a bit of that, yeah. And so there's a cynical element of it, maybe. Well, not even cynical. I think there's a kind of question about whether the performance of leadership is somehow a part of research excellence, and how those two relate to one another, really. I mean, you could suggest that it's part, from the HRC's point of view, it's partly, there's quite a drive in the HRC over the last 5 years to make researchers rethink the idea, for instance, the lone wolf kind of researcher model, the single author monograph, the ivory tower, the scholar on their own in a garret. Not that they really exist, but there is a sort of sense in which we're trying to break that down as not good. And I think that this is part of that, but it's more subtle than that, and I think more interesting than that. Anyone else? I didn't think this slide was going to be controversial. Right, so I'm going to talk about 3 elements of leadership very quickly, and then we'll get on to some more interesting stuff because people will actually demonstrate what they're doing. I'm going to talk about research environment, I'm going to talk about individual development, and I'm going to talk about collaboration. And these are all kind of interlinked, as far as I'm concerned, as ways of thinking about leadership. So, research environment, this is kind of broadly defined. Can I please say? So there's very specific kind of development, actually making relationships, actually developing the environment that you work in and the people working in your field. And that this is a way you can kind of demonstrate a kind of cognate work, I think, that's going on with your own research. That you're doing your own individual excellent research, but you're also able to encourage work and to ensure that others can therefore work in a particular way, or can see new ways and new connections and new kind of relationships. The AHRC is particularly interested in learning societies for some reason. Anyone here doing work with learning societies?
What's the definition of a learning society?
That's a good question. I don't really know. A society which is dedicated to intellectual pursuits of some kind.
A peak body.
Say again?
A peak body. Sorry, I'm probably using
Australian
terminology. A peak body, so say a body that represents the interests of a larger group of scholars in a particular field?
Yes,
would that be one?
to a certain extent, yeah. So, like in my field, it would be the Renaissance Society of America, or the Society of Renaissance Studies, or the Historical Association. And so, engaging with these, and this is something you can do particularly easily as a PGR student, or just a postdoc or an ECR, because actually there's an awful lot of opportunity to work with learning societies. Learning societies, for the most part, are very keen on funding postgraduate research, at least giving some kind of help to postgraduate students and interfacing with them, running conferences and such. And this kind of thing, the reason that the AHRC is interested is because it demonstrates that you're working with a non-HEI body and you're working with kind of national discussions. I mean, the problem seems to me, firstly, that learning societies are weirdly defined. I mean, I don't know whether the Gaskell Society, for instance, would be a learning society. Probably would. But also the learning societies are sort of, it's like doing research by committee if you get anywhere near a learning society, because they're big organisations that are very slow moving and that don't manoeuvre particularly well. So whether this is a great way forward. But I think what it means is research environment is not just about buying loads of books and making a room happen. It's about kind of contributing to the ethos of research in your field. And one of the quickest ways you can do that on a kind of wider scale is by looking to those who kind of lead that research. The English Association in my field, for instance, would be quite a good way of doing it. This is a kind of clearly easily doable kind of research environment thing that we're going to hear a little bit later about, but the idea that you might form networks, clusters, hubs of any description, yeah, and that you can demonstrate that you've been part of setting that up, and that setting that up was to a purpose, and was to a purpose that wasn't just to promote your own work, was to enable others to work in your kind of new and interesting ways. And in fact, I think, like conferences particularly, this year in ArtsMethods we're funding nearly 30 conferences over the whole year. And I think that's a kind of clear, and they're very, very interesting. It's a clear kind of investment that we're making, and I think that students are making in the fact that these kinds of relationships you build up by putting together a conference is sort of fundamental to be able to say, I can do this. But the question is, we're running 30 of them, which means that nearly everyone who's doing a PhD in the arts and languages at the moment is involved in a conference of some description. I ran conferences as a PhD student. It's about whether you can say, I've done this conference, fine, what does that mean? How does that then have influence and impact and the transformative effect that the AHRC is looking for, or the SRC might be? And it's about being able to, as I said, it's about being able to articulate this, being able to say, this is why doing this is important, because we opened up a new research field, because we brought these new people in, because we did this here, because we published this afterwards. So having the kind of self-consciousness, I think, to be able to sort of say, this is what is making the difference. There's a more kind of woolly version of research environment, which is about a sense in which you will, as a research leader, transform approach and ethos, if that makes sense. And these are just sort of 3 or 4 that I think are kind of interesting. Demonstrating entrepreneurialism is kind of very key, and how you might want to define that is up to you. But having a kind of go-getter initiative kind of sense of things, but also looking outside the box, thinking about different ways of kind of organising research, I think is kind of interesting. I mean, is entrepreneurialism a dirty word in this room? I'm not really sure. I did it when I was 16. I had to do entrepreneurialism. It kind of upset me. But the idea in which you might make some form of kind of not money, but you might think about ways in which this might create income. It's kind of not unusual in academia for this to be the case. If you go elsewhere within the university, there's a lot of money being made. And you go and talk to intellectual property people, very interesting, startups. And I don't think that these things should necessarily not be part of arts and languages and humanities research, particularly. Intellectual leadership is a process rather than an end. This is another nice phrase which I picked verbatim from someone. But again, this is what we were talking about, the relationship between excellence and leadership. That leadership is not something you just tag on to an application for something or to your CV. It's not something you say, oh, I need to have done some of this, so I tick this particular box. I think that what, from my point of view, ideas of leadership are about are demonstrably developing your own research agendas and practices in a way that demonstrates leadership as well. Mentoring is, well, organizational research, talk about mentoring. Anyone mentored anyone? Anyone been a mentee? This is a really interesting idea, really. That mentoring is obviously one way you might perform a research leadership role, because you can, there's a knowledge transfer going on behind, experience transfer as well, and you're enabling a younger scholar or a less experienced scholar perhaps to therefore go on and do different things and to see their research career in a different light or to see their research in a different light. But you might want to think about when the mentoring happens, whether it's a formal type of mentoring. There's a formal process of mentoring that happens within the university, which is kind of about professionalisation, or whether there's mentoring that happens at an informal level where you can be able to talk about relationships that you have that have this kind of element. And also that if you're junior in your career, when applying for stuff and talking about research leadership, that research leadership is not just about being the mentor, being part of the relationship and recognising that you need to have this relationship in order to think in a more diverse and broad way about your career. I think it demonstrates that you are open to thinking in different ways. Individual. This is kind of the most straightforward way of thinking about it. This is what I'm interested in doing. I don't know how you might record leadership. Have you got any idea how you might record research leadership? Is there a sort of formalised process anyway? Because as I've said, every part of research leadership is individual, right? So the way in which you might demonstrate that you have become a better leader is kind of interesting. Anyone got any ideas how we might do this? And the reason I ask this is because if it's a lot of fuss about nothing if we can't say what happened. But also, at some point, having a demonstrable kind of recorded research leadership effect is going to be important. And this is not just because you have to audit everything. This is because it is important to our ethos as researchers, and we should be able to point to it, right?
Citations.
Citations? Yeah, that's a good. But again, how does that differ from excellence?
It's part of excellence, but
It's part of excellence.
if you produce the most highly cited work in your discipline.
Yeah. So actually, there is a basic leadership, which is just excellent research, which has nothing else. So, these three here I'm quite interested in. The idea that we can shift the frameworks of the research process through thinking about what it means to be a leader in research and what it means to lead research, rather than simply sitting in our own silos, working on our own stuff, but going out and trying to disseminate and think in a kind of more formally leadership kind of way. Everyone looks a bit scared. I'm not trying to take over the world. I might try it. But yeah, so the idea that basically, again, rethinking what it means to be a researcher and therefore how you relate to other people and how you might think about your career might actually then shift the way in which you think about research. Not in a kind of expedient way, if I do this bit of research, I might become a great research leader. But I think the key is to think about it more holistically, that I want to think carefully about how I can lead in my field and how I can enable other people to work in a particular area, or how I can kind of transform what I do and the people that do it with me. And collaboration. I talked about collaboration briefly. Sharing of expertise, I think, is the kind of key thing, but also demonstrating how people have learned from what you have done or what you're doing. Right, I'm going to finish up. This is my last slide. Meta leadership. This is the thing that I'm really interested in because we'll all have little kinds of bits of leadership or really good bits of leadership, but kind of being able to think and articulate and put into words and have a research leadership vocabulary, I think might be quite interesting. To be able to say that this is what differentiates me from other people. This is what makes me stand out in terms of how I undertake my research.